She said sorry for being late. Everything changed when the Mafia boss noticed she was limping. Nadia was already 7 minutes late when the elevator doors opened on the wrong floor. She had been running. Not a clean, confident run. The kind of run that a person does when one knee has been quietly falling apart for 3 years, and the body has learned to compensate in ways that look almost normal, unless someone is paying close attention. She had her bag on one shoulder, a coffee cup she had not had a single sip of, and a name written on a crumpled receipt that said, "Third floor, East Kitchen, ask for Pete." She was not on the third floor. She was on the 34th. The elevator had been the one closest to the revolving door. She had pressed what she thought was the right button. The building was all glass and marble, and the kind of silence that tells you money lives here, a lot of it. The quiet kind that does not need to announce itself. She had not noticed the separate panel on the left side of the elevator. She had not noticed a lot of things. She had been focused on not being late. She had already been fired twice this year and she could not afford a third time, not with rent due in 4 days, and her knee appointment rescheduled twice, because she kept choosing rent over doctors, and she was very good at that particular kind of choosing. The doors opened. She walked out before she looked up. When she looked up, she stopped walking. The room was long and wide, with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the whole city below like it had been arranged there for viewing pleasure. There was a table, dark wood, long enough to seat 20, though only 12 chairs were occupied. 12 men in suits, all of them mid-conversation, all of them now completely silent. Not the silence of people who were startled. The silence of people who were very used to controlling whatever room they were in, and who had just noticed something that did not belong. Nadia felt that silence the way you feel cold water, all at once. She did the only thing her body had been trained to do since she was old enough to understand that making yourself small and sorry was the fastest way to make danger go away. She said, "I'm so sorry. I'm late. I have the wrong floor. I'm so sorry." She was already backing toward the elevator. Her hand was behind her, feeling for the button panel. The men at the table watched her, the way people watch something unexpected, not with cruelty, just with the flat, measuring attention of people who spend a lot of time deciding what things are worth. All of them, except one. The man at the head of the table had not moved. He had not shifted in his chair or changed his expression. He was not young but not old either, somewhere in the space between 40 and something harder to name, with dark hair cut close, and a face that looked like it had been built for a colder climate. His suit was the color of charcoal. His hands were flat on the table. He was not watching her the way the others were. He was watching her feet. Nadia did not notice. She was still apologizing. The elevator button finally pressed under her fingers. The doors behind her began to slide open. "Wrong floor," she said one more time, to no one in particular, to the whole room, to the universe, because she apologized to things that could not hear her on a regular basis. She stepped back into the elevator. The doors closed. She leaned against the back wall and pressed her eyes shut, and stood there for the full descent, counting floors in her head, the way she counted things when her chest got too tight. She got to the 3rd floor. She got to Pete. She put on her apron, and she did not mention what happened on the 34th floor, because it was embarrassing and strange, and already starting to feel like something that had happened to someone else. She spent the next 6 hours carrying trays, refilling water glasses, and apologizing to people who bumped into her, rather than the other way around. Her knee held out until about 4 in the afternoon. Then it began its familiar complaint, the dull, grinding ache that started just below the kneecap and spread upward if she did not rest it. She did not rest it. She took 2 painkillers from the bottom of her bag, the ones she bought in bulk from the discount pharmacy 2 blocks from her apartment, and she kept moving. The hitch in her step got worse as the afternoon wore on. It was subtle. She had spent 3 years making it subtle. But it was there, a slight drag on the left side, a fraction of a second longer than the right, a small thing that most people never saw, because most people were not paying that kind of attention. She finished the shift. She signed the timesheet. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building and counted the cash in the envelope they gave her, and it was enough for 2 days of groceries if she was careful. She put the envelope in her bag. She did not know that upstairs, on the 34th floor, A man who had not looked away from her feet until the elevator doors closed, had picked up his phone and made a call. She did not know what he said. She walked to the bus stop, her left foot dragging just slightly more than usual, the city moving around her the way cities do, fast and loud and completely indifferent. 3 days later, her phone rang from a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end was a woman, clear and professional, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has been trained to sound like everything is under control at all times. The woman said she was calling on behalf of a private residence. There was a kitchen position, 6 weeks. The hours were flexible. The pay she named was not a number Nadia had ever heard in the context of her own life. She made the woman repeat it. The woman repeated it without impatience. Nadia said she needed to think about it. She did not need to think about it. She said yes before she put the phone down. That night she sat on her kitchen floor, which was the coolest place in the apartment and good for her knee, and she ate crackers, and thought about what kind of person takes a job with no address given yet, and a blocked phone number, and a number that large and no real explanation. She thought about that for a long time. Then she thought about rent. Then she stopped thinking about the first thing. She showed up 2 days later to an address in the east quarter of the city, a building that did not look like it needed to try very hard to look important, because it simply was. A man in the lobby who did not introduce himself checked her name against a list and took her up to the 41st floor in an elevator that was very clearly not the service elevator. She did not say anything about this. The floor opened into a private residence, not an office, a place where someone actually lived, with a kitchen that was bigger than her entire apartment and stocked with more than she had ever seen in one place. A woman named Clara met her at the kitchen door. Clara was the housekeeper, she explained. She was warm and efficient and answered exactly the questions Nadia asked, and none of the questions Nadia did not ask. The contract was simple. Prepare meals on the schedule provided. Keep to the kitchen and the service hallway. Do not disturb the residents otherwise. Nadia tied her apron. She looked at the spice rack, which was full, organized, and stocked with things she had cooked with her whole life. She did not know why that small detail made the back of her throat tight. She told herself it was nothing. She started cooking. She did not see him that first day, or the second. The meals she prepared were collected by Clara, and she never saw who ate them or where. She began to relax into the routine of it, the early mornings, the precise schedules, the quality of the ingredients, the fact that for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was cooking food that was worth cooking, and being paid enough to actually breathe. On the third evening, she was finishing the cleanup when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside the kitchen. She did not look up right away. When she did, he was standing in the doorway. She recognized him immediately. The charcoal suit was different now, a darker one, but the face was the same, the man from the 34th floor, the one who had not looked at her face. He was looking at her face now. She held a dish towel in both hands and did not say anything, because she could not decide which thing to say first. He looked at the counter. On it, beside the cooled pans, was a folder, a manila folder, thin, with a small stack of papers inside and 2 business cards clipped to the front. "That is for you," he said. His voice was even, low, not unkind. The accent was slight, like something he had spent years making quieter. "You do not have to use them. There is no expectation." He left before she opened it. She opened it. 2 names, 1 orthopedic specialist, 1 physical therapist, a note at the top, written in handwriting that looked like it had been learned under strict instruction, each letter deliberate. The note said, "These are covered. There is no obligation. You do not have to explain anything to them or to me." She read it twice. She put it down. She picked up the dish towel and finished drying the pan she had been holding, because she needed something to do with her hands that made sense, that had a beginning and an end, that she knew how to finish. Her eyes were doing something she did not have a word for that was not embarrassing. She told herself it was the onions from earlier. There had been no onions in that night's meal. She finished the kitchen, turned off the lights, and walked to the elevator. Her left foot dragged a little more than usual because it was late and she was tired, and she had stopped, for some reason she could not name, performing the effort of hiding it. In the elevator going down, She held the folder against her chest. She did not know what to do with someone noticing, without needing anything back for it. She had spent her whole life waiting for the part where the noticing cost her something. The elevator reached the ground floor. She walked out into the night, still waiting. The job had rules, and the rules made sense. And for the first 2 weeks, Nadia followed them the way she followed most things that made sense, which was carefully, and without asking questions. She did not strictly need answered. She arrived each morning at 6:30. She let herself in through the service entrance with the key card Clara had given her. She started the breakfast preparations before anyone in the residence was awake, or at least before anyone appeared. The kitchen was hers in those early hours, and she was good enough at her work that she had learned to love the version of herself that existed inside it. The version that moved with purpose, that knew exactly what she was doing and why, that did not need to apologize for taking up space when the space was specifically designed for her to take up. The meals she made were eaten. She knew this because the plates came back clean. She knew nothing else about who ate them or what they thought. She told herself this was fine. She was hired to cook, not to be appreciated. On the 14th day, Clara mentioned there would be guests on Friday evening. 8 of them. A formal dinner. Nadia wrote down the menu. She asked the questions she needed to ask. She spent Thursday sourcing ingredients, which Clara arranged transportation for, and she spent Friday morning doing prep work that started before sunrise. She was not nervous. She was competent, and she knew she was competent, and the knowing of it had taken a long time to arrive, but it had arrived, and she held on to it, the way you hold something you earned, rather than something you were given. By the time the guests arrived, she was mid-service, running the plates with the kind of focused quiet that made her invisible in a room, which was exactly how she preferred to exist in rooms full of people she did not know. The dining room was through a set of double doors from the kitchen corridor. She pushed through them with 2 plates, set them without making eye contact, went back for 2 more. It was smooth work. She had done catering shifts in rooms like this before, rooms where the people at the table had a kind of weight to them that was not physical but was very real, where conversations stopped in a certain way when service staff entered and resumed in another language or at a lower register. She was on her 4th pass when she saw the man with the gold watch. He was not one of the people she had been introduced to in the brief, practical rundown Clara had given her. He had arrived late. He was seated at the far end of the table, talking too loudly to the man beside him, and he had the air of someone who had decided he was the most important person in any room long ago and had never been sufficiently corrected. Nadia did not look at him longer than a second. She set a plate. She turned to go back through the corridor doors. Her left knee had been difficult all day. The cold front that had come in overnight did something to the joint that she had never been able to fully explain. Not to the 2 cheaper doctors she had seen in the past 3 years. Not to herself. It tightened. It made the mechanics of a normal step require slightly more of her attention than usual. She was giving it that attention when the man with the gold watch shifted in his chair and extended his leg into the corridor she was walking through. She did not see it in time. Her left foot caught the obstruction, and the momentum of her forward step did the rest. She went down fast, the way falling always happens, faster than the mind can negotiate with, and the 2 plates she was carrying went with her, and the sound of ceramic meeting marble floor was very loud, in a room that had just gone very quiet. She was on her hands and knees. The plates had shattered. The food was across the floor and she was in the middle of it, and the man with the gold watch made a sound that was meant to be a laugh. Nadia's face went hot. She started gathering pieces. Her hands moved automatically, the deep muscle memory of making a mess smaller, making herself smaller, fixing things before anyone had to be inconvenienced by them. "I'm so sorry," she said, to no one, to everyone, to the floor. "I'm sorry. Let me get this." The room was still very quiet. She heard a chair move, not beside her, at the head of the table. She did not look up. She was still collecting ceramic fragments. There was a cut on one finger from a shard she had not seen clearly, and she only noticed it because the piece she picked up came away with a small red smear, and her brain registered this in a distant, unimportant way, because the more pressing thing was the mess, and the silence, and the fact that 8 people were watching her be small on the floor of their dinner. Someone crouched beside her. She looked up. It was him. Not a staff member. Not Clara. Him. In the dark suit, down on the floor of his own dining room beside her, picking up a piece of ceramic that had slid under the leg of the nearest chair. She stared at him. He did not look at the floor. He looked at the man with the gold watch and said something. She did not understand the language. She did not need to. The quality of the words was enough. They were quiet words. The quietest, flattest, most controlled words she had ever heard come out of a human mouth. And every single person at the table heard them, and the man with the gold watch lost every bit of color in his face. He stood up. He left. Not his plate. Not his jacket, which was still folded over the back of his chair. He was simply gone, and the sound of the elevator was the last thing before the room exhaled. Nadia was still on the floor. He held out the piece of ceramic he had collected, and she took it, automatically, because her hands were doing things while her brain caught up. "The cut on your finger," he said. His voice was back to that even low register. "Clara has a kit in the kitchen drawer, second from the window." She looked at her finger. The cut was small. She had not felt it. "Thank you," she said. And then, from deep reflex, "I'm sorry for the—" "You don't have to apologize," he said. He stood up and held a hand out to help her, and she took it, and he pulled her to her feet with no effort and no theater. "For other people's choices." He said it like it was a fact, like gravity. She did not say anything, because there was nothing in her vocabulary that matched what to say to that specific sentence delivered in that specific tone. She went back to the kitchen. She found the first aid kit in the second drawer from the window. She wrapped her finger. She cleaned up. She sent the replacement plates through with Clara, who appeared in the kitchen doorway, exactly once to look at Nadia, with eyes that said many things Clara would never put into words. Nadia nodded at her. Clara nodded back. The rest of the service went without difficulty. When the last guest left and the kitchen was clean and she was standing by the service door with her coat and her bag, she realized something that stopped her with her hand on the door. She had not hidden the limp. Not once. Not for the entire second half of the evening. The adrenaline of the fall and the cleanup and the strange, still moment of being helped off the floor had broken the habit clean, and she had spent 3 hours moving through that kitchen and that corridor with no performance, no compensation, no careful redistribution of weight. She stood at the door thinking about that. Then she thought about the folder still in her bag, the specialist's card still in her wallet. She had called the office 2 days after he left it on the counter. She had made an appointment. She had told herself she was doing it because it was free, and free was not a thing she turned down. When her knee felt the way it had been feeling lately, she had not let herself attach any other meaning to it. Now, standing at the service door with the quiet of the cleaned kitchen behind her, she thought that maybe she had been lying to herself, which was another thing she was very good at, and had been doing for a very long time. She went home. She sat on her kitchen floor, the cool tile good against the back of her knee, and she ate the small portion of the evening's dessert that Clara had quietly set aside for her in a container labeled with her name. Lemon cake. Very good. She ate it slowly and did not think about the evening, because thinking about it in any direct way still felt too large for the kitchen floor on a Friday night. Outside, the city was doing what cities do when nobody needs them, being loud anyway. She finished the cake. She went to bed. The specialist appointment was in 10 days. She had already rescheduled it once, 2 days after making it, out of a habit so old she had not even noticed herself doing it until she was already hanging up the phone. Then she had called back and rescheduled it again, this time with a firmness in her voice that surprised her. She was keeping it. She was not entirely sure why that felt like a decision about something much bigger than a doctor's appointment, but it did. She closed her eyes. Somewhere across the city, on the 41st floor, in the long kitchen with the good spice rack, the lights were off. The folder was still on the counter. There was a second appointment card inside it that she had not noticed until the following morning. The same physical therapist, but written in the margin beside the address, in that same careful handwriting, were 2 words: "No rush." She read them on her way out the door on Saturday morning, and stood in the hallway of her apartment building for longer than made sense. Then she put the card in her wallet, beside the other one. She went to get the bus. She stopped hiding the limp that day too. Not deliberately. She stopped. The walk to the bus stop was 3 blocks, and she walked all 3 of them the way her knee actually needed her to walk them. Without apology, without performance, and the world did not end, and no one on the street looked at her with anything other than the complete indifference of people who have their own problems. And she arrived at the bus stop, and the bus came, and she got on it. Something in her chest was doing something she did not have a clean word for. She watched the city go by through the window. She did not try to name it. She just let it be there, whatever it was, sitting in her chest like a small, warm, very unfamiliar thing. The physical therapy office smelled like eucalyptus and effort. Nadia sat in the waiting room with her bag on her lap and looked at a poster on the wall about joint health, which she had read 3 times now, not because it was interesting, but because reading things was easier than sitting with the feeling of being somewhere that was real and had her actual name in an actual system, a system someone else had put her name into without being asked to. She had almost not come. She had stood outside the building for 4 minutes first. This was not a record. She had once stood outside a job interview for 11 minutes, and then walked away, and then walked back, and made it inside with 2 minutes to spare, which was its own kind of victory. She was good at doing things she almost did not do. It was one of her more exhausting skills. The specialist had been kind and thorough. The diagnosis was something she already knew the outline of because her body had been telling her for 3 years, and she had been translating it from the language of pain into something she could afford to ignore. Patellar tracking disorder, complicated by an old injury she had never had properly treated. Manageable. Significantly more manageable with the right intervention than without. The physical therapist, a woman named Georgia, had the kind of competence that announces itself without effort. She showed Nadia 3 exercises on the first visit. She corrected her form twice, not with frustration, but with the calm precision of someone who has done this thousands of times and finds it neither boring nor extraordinary, just work. Nadia liked her immediately, which surprised her because she was not usually quick to like people in professional settings. People in professional settings could still fire her. Georgia could not fire her. The visits were not conditional on performance. There was nothing Nadia could do badly enough to be sent away. That was a feeling she was not sure she had experienced before, and she carried it around for 2 days after the first appointment, turning it over, trying to find the catch. She was still looking for the catch on the Monday evening when she was in the kitchen finishing the dinner cleanup, and she heard his footsteps in the hallway. She had learned to recognize them. This embarrassed her slightly, but it was factual. He moved in a particular way, deliberate and quiet, the kind of quiet that is not trying to be quiet but simply is. She had started cooking with one ear slightly tilted toward the hallway without deciding to. He appeared in the doorway. Jacket off. The first time she had seen him without the suit jacket. He had a glass of water in one hand and a folder of papers in the other, and he looked, for the first time in all the weeks she had been here, like someone who had been working for a very long time without stopping. She did not say anything about this. She dried a pan. He set the glass on the counter. He sat on the stool at the kitchen island the way someone sits on a stool when they need to stop being vertical for a moment, without fully committing to sitting down somewhere comfortable. Nadia set a second cup of tea on the counter 3 feet away from where he was sitting, and went back to the sink. This was a thing that had developed over the past week without discussion. The tea appearing near where he was, the papers spread out, the quiet between them that had its own texture by now. She was not sure when working in the same room as him had stopped feeling like standing near something unpredictable, and had started feeling like the end of a long day. She did not think about that too hard. "How was the appointment?" he said. It was not quite a question. It was the phrasing of someone who already knew she had gone, but who was giving her the space to say as much or as little as she chose. "Good," she said. "They gave me exercises. Are they helping? It has been 4 days. So you don't know yet. So I don't know yet." He picked up his tea. He turned a page in the folder. She finished the pans. She wiped down the counter. She was thinking about something she had been thinking about for a while, a question that had a specific answer she would probably not be given, but that she had been carrying around anyway. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He did not look up from the folder. "Yes. Why?" He turned another page. Why what? You know what, she said, which was more direct than she usually was with anyone, and especially with him, and she did not take it back because it was true. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to fold the folder closed and say goodnight, and they were going to leave this particular conversation unfinished, which was where most of the conversations they had ended up. She had gotten used to it. She had her own reasons for not finishing sentences, and she did not think she had the right to demand that other people finish theirs. Then he said, "My sister had a similar injury." She did not move. "She walked the same way," he said. His voice was the same temperature, flat and even. For years, she told people she was fine. He turned the last page in the folder. He closed it. "She was not fine," he said. That was all. Nadia stood at the counter and understood exactly the shape of what she had not been told, the past tense that lived inside those sentences. The reason someone had stocked this kitchen with her ingredients before she arrived. The reason the folder had 2 cards instead of 1. She did not say she was sorry, not because she did not feel it, but because she had spent enough time on the receiving end of sorry to know that sometimes it was the most useless thing one person could offer another. She went to the pantry. She took down flour, butter, and a jar of blueberry preserves she had noticed on her first day and never used. She set them on the counter. He watched her for a moment. "You don't have to cook anything else tonight," he said. "I know," she said. She started measuring. He stayed at the island while she worked. He went back to his papers. The kitchen was warm and quiet, and smelled like butter beginning to brown, and she did not talk, and he did not talk, and the city outside the window did its thing, which was to keep going, completely indifferent to what was happening on the 41st floor of this particular building. The cake took 40 minutes. When it came out of the oven, she cut a piece, and put it on a small plate, and slid it across the island without a word. He looked at it. Something crossed his face that she did not look at directly, the way you do not look directly at something that is too raw for eye contact. He ate it. She cleaned the baking dishes. "This was hers," he said, when the plate was empty. "I thought it might be," she said. He did not ask how she knew. She did not explain. Some things land without the need for the architecture of how they got there. She dried the last dish. She put it away. She took her coat from the hook by the service door. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Nadia." She went down in the elevator. The lobby was empty. The street outside had gone cool, and she pulled her coat tighter and walked the 3 blocks to the bus stop with her left foot doing what it always did, the slight drag, the small hitch, and she let it do it without correction. She was thinking about his face when he looked at the plate. She was thinking about the word fine and all the things it covered when it was not true. She was thinking about her knee appointment in 2 days with Georgia, and the exercises she had remembered to do twice already this week, and the fact that for the first time in 3 years, she was doing something other than managing. The bus came. She got on. The city went past the window. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone who had a reason to look and did not use that reason to take anything from you. She had not known there was a version of being seen that worked like that. She was still learning what to do with it, but she was keeping the appointments, and she was not hiding the limp. And those 2 things, small as they were, felt like the beginning of something she did not yet have the right word for. She pressed her forehead to the cool window of the bus. Somewhere behind her, the building she had worked in all evening went on being what it was, tall and quiet and full of things she did not know. She let the city carry her home. There is a particular kind of quiet that exists at 3 in the morning that is different from any other hour. Not peaceful, awake, like the city remembers itself differently when nobody is performing for it. Nadia knew this quiet well. She had been on first-name terms with it for 3 years, since the knee started being a serious problem and sleep became something that happened in 2-hour windows between pain she had learned to not fully admit was pain. She had a routine for the bad nights. Cold tile, chamomile tea, the cheap kind from the box that tasted like something that used to be near a flower. The radio on very low, old stations that played things from decades before she was born, music that had no memory of her and asked nothing. On the nights she worked late, she sometimes did not go home. Clara had shown her, without making it a point, that the kitchen was accessible to her outside of scheduled hours. She had said it in the way that people say things when they are communicating something the person in charge has communicated to them, not a rule, a permission. Nadia had not used it for the first 2 weeks. The third week she arrived at 2 in the morning because her building's heating had gone out, and her apartment was cold enough to hurt, and she had sat in the kitchen with her tea and her radio earphones, and her knee against the cool cabinet door, and she had stayed until 4 and then gone home. He had been there. She had not expected that. She had not expected anyone. She had opened the kitchen door and stopped in the doorway, and he was at the island with his papers, which seemed to be the natural habitat of his late evenings, and they had looked at each other for a moment. He had looked back at his papers. She had made her tea. Neither of them said a word about it. By the 4th week it was almost a pattern. Not every night. 2 or 3 nights a week she would arrive in the small hours for reasons that varied. The knee, the cold, the particular quality of sleeplessness that felt less bad in a room with better ventilation than her apartment. And he would already be there. Or he would arrive an hour after her, and they would exist in the same kitchen, while the city outside the windows did its 3 in the morning version of existing. She cooked things, not full meals, small things, something warm. He ate whatever she put near him. She drank her tea. He worked. Sometimes he did not work but sat with the papers closed and a glass of water, and the far-off look of someone doing their thinking out loud, in a language she could not hear. She did not intrude on that. She had her own version of it. What they had was not silence exactly. It had texture. There were words in it, occasionally. A question about the tea, an observation about the temperature in the building, once a comment about a story she had been listening to on the radio through one earphone, and had apparently been reacting to with her face without realizing. He had said, without looking up, "What happened?" She had said, "In the story?" He had said, "Your face." She had told him about the story. He had listened. He had said nothing when she finished, but he had the particular stillness of someone who has heard something and has not yet decided what to do with it. She had gone back to her tea. He had gone back to his papers. This was the texture of it. On a Wednesday night in the 5th week, she arrived at the kitchen to find it empty. She made her tea. She sat on the floor with her back against the cool cabinet door, which was her preferred position, the one that did the most for the knee. She had her radio. She was listening to something that was almost certainly from the 1960s, and she was letting herself be half present in the way that 3 in the morning permits. She heard the elevator in the hallway. He came in with his jacket over one arm, and the look on his face of someone who has been in a room full of people being difficult for too long. She recognized that look because it lived in the vicinity of a headache and a very controlled composure, and she had worn it herself during every difficult catering shift she had ever worked. He saw her on the floor. He did not say anything about it. He put the jacket on the stool, set his phone on the counter, and looked at the kettle. She said, "It just boiled." He made himself a cup. He sat on the floor too, not beside her but across the kitchen, back against the island, which was maybe 8 feet away, and the two of them sat on the kitchen floor at 3 in the morning, with their tea and did not talk. It was a very good not talking. After a while, she said, "Does it ever feel like you built a life and then got locked inside it?" She did not plan to say it. It arrived out of the particular honesty that 3 in the morning produces in people who are tired enough to stop performing. He turned his cup in his hands. He said, "Every day." She looked at the window. The city was still out there. "I made mine out of surviving," she said. "I got very good at surviving, and then I realized surviving is not the same as living. And by then, I had built the whole thing around just not stopping." He did not respond immediately. She had gotten used to the delay between what she said and what he responded, the way he seemed to actually think before he spoke, rather than generating words to fill the air. "Mine was built for other people," he said. "There is not much room inside it for things that are only for me." She looked at him across the kitchen. He was looking at the floor between them. "The cake," she said. "That was for your sister." "Yes." She would have been how old? He was quiet. Then, 34. She did not say she was sorry. She had already decided she was not going to say sorry to him about things that deserved something more than sorry, and this was one of those things. She sounds like she was loved, she said instead. He looked up. She held the look for a moment, and then went back to her tea, because there was a limit to how much two people could see of each other at once, even people who were getting used to being seen. She was, he said. Not always well, not always correctly, but yes. Nadia thought about being loved, not always well, and not always correctly. She thought about all the people in her own life who had loved her imperfectly, and the damage that sometimes left, and the occasional strange warmth of it, the proof that something was there, even when the method was wrong. That's most love, she said. He nodded slowly. The radio in her earphone played something with a piano that was quiet and unhurried. She could only hear it faintly. It was the kind of music that does not ask you to do anything, just to exist in the same room with it. She offered him one earphone. He looked at it. He looked at her. He reached across and took it. She kept the other one. They sat on the kitchen floor with one earbud each, and listened to the same song, and did not talk about anything else. The city outside kept going. After the song finished and another one started, he handed the earbud back. He got up from the floor without difficulty, which she had started to notice, as a thing she noticed. The ease of his body in space, the kind of physical confidence that is not performed. He picked up his jacket from the stool. He said, "Good night, Nadia." She said, "Good night." He went down the hallway toward the residence. She sat on the kitchen floor for another 20 minutes. Her knee was comfortable. Her tea was cool. The radio was playing something she did not recognize. She thought about what it meant that she had told him the truest thing she knew about herself, the thing about surviving versus living, and he had not used it for anything, had not fixed it or minimized it or pivoted to something more comfortable, had just received it and offered something of his own in return, equally true, equally careful. She had spent her whole life waiting for the price of honesty. There had not been one. She was beginning to think this was a fact about him rather than a delay. She got up from the floor. She put her cup in the sink. She turned off the kitchen light and took the service elevator down and walked out into the 4 a.m. city, and it was cold and clear, and the streets were almost empty. She walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. She did not hide the limp. She did not even think about hiding the limp. The bus came. She got on it. She leaned her head against the window and the city went past, lit and awake and going about its night, and she felt something in her chest that had been very small and very new for several weeks now, getting slightly larger and slightly less terrifying. She did not name it, but she let it be there. She got off at her stop and walked up the 4 flights to her apartment and unlocked the door and stood in the small hallway of the life she had built entirely out of not stopping, and thought that maybe, for the first time, she wanted to build something with a different material. She went to bed. She slept well. The last day of the contract arrived the way last days arrive, which is precisely on schedule, no matter how completely you have failed to prepare for it. Nadia had been aware of it coming for a week. She had been aware of it the way you are aware of a sound from another room, present at the edge of perception, possible to ignore if you kept yourself sufficiently busy. She had kept herself sufficiently busy. She had deep cleaned the pantry, reorganized the spice rack by cuisine rather than alphabetically, which she thought was a genuine improvement, and cooked every recipe she had been meaning to try since she arrived, but had been saving for days when she needed something to focus on. She had a lot to focus on. The knee was better, not fixed. Georgia said. Fixed was not quite the right word, that the goal was functional and pain-managed, and that Nadia had responded well to the exercises, which was a thing Georgia said with actual warmth, and not just clinical neutrality. Nadia had gone to every appointment. She had done the exercises at home. She had stopped buying the bulk painkillers and started using the proper medication the specialist had prescribed, which cost nothing because of the coverage, and which worked considerably better. She still walked with a hitch on bad days. She had been told this might always be true depending on conditions. She had thought about that, the might always, and found that she did not feel the way she expected to feel about it. She had expected grief. She felt something closer to a realistic arrangement with a fact. The limp was part of how she moved. She had spent 3 years apologizing for it, hiding it, burning extra energy on its concealment that could have gone toward other things. She had stopped doing that. She was not sure exactly when she had stopped. It had not been a decision. It had been more like a door that she had simply walked through one evening and not walked back through. On the morning of the last day, she arrived at 6:30 as always. She made breakfast as always. She prepped the day's meals. She cleaned as she went, which was habit, efficient and automatic. At 4 in the afternoon, with the kitchen in order and the evening meal prepared and covered and labeled for Clara, she took off her apron and folded it and set it on the counter. She got her coat and her bag from the hook. She held the key card that had led her into this building, this floor, this kitchen for 6 weeks. She had planned to leave it on the counter with a note. She had written the note at home the night before. She had it in her coat pocket. It was professional and warm and said everything she needed to say at a safe distance from the person she was saying it to. She stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then she walked down the hallway. He was at the window in the main room, which is where he always was when she saw him outside of the kitchen. The city below him in the early evening light. The buildings going amber and gray. He was not on his phone. He was not reading. He was simply standing at the window. She had interrupted him doing nothing. "I came to return the key card," she said. She was holding it in her left hand. She was aware of holding it in her left hand. He turned from the window. He looked at her, and then at the card, and then at her again, and did not say anything immediately, which was his nature, and which she had learned to read, not as indifference, but as the opposite of it. She started to say what she had planned to say. The prepared version, professional, warm, conclusive. She got 2 words in. "I'm sorry." "Stop," he said. She stopped. He crossed the room, not quickly, not with any theater, and stood in the space between where she was and where the window was, not close enough to crowd her, close enough that she could see the effort in his stillness. "You walked into the wrong room," he said, and apologized for it. She looked at him. "You fell on the floor of my dining room and apologized for it. You cooked in this kitchen for 6 weeks, and you apologized any time you made a sound that might have reached the hallway. You exist in a way that costs no one anything, and you have been apologizing for it your entire life." She opened her mouth. "I am asking you to stop," he said. "Not for me. For you. As a request from one person who has watched you do it for 6 weeks, to the person who deserves to stop." The room was very quiet. Her chest was doing that thing it had been doing for weeks now, the small, warm thing that had gotten less terrifying and was now simply present and large and very hard to look at directly. "The contract is over," he said. "The offer is not." She looked at him. He said, "Stay." It was not a complicated word. It was not dramatic or large or accompanied by anything. He said it the way he said everything, with the same flat, careful weight, like a fact he had arrived at and was now presenting without embellishment. She looked at the key card in her hand. She thought about the life she had built out of surviving, the apartment with the cold winters, the bus at 4 in the morning, the crackers and the discount painkillers, the constant performance of being smaller and quieter and sorrier than she was. She thought about what she had told him on the kitchen floor, about not knowing the difference between surviving and living until you had been doing the wrong one for too long. She thought about 3 in the morning, and 1 earbud, and blueberry cake, and the look on his face when he said every day. She thought about what it felt like to be seen without being charged for it. She looked at him. She set the key card on the side table next to the window, not to return it. She set it down carefully, the way you set down something that belongs somewhere, and you are putting it in its place. He looked at the card. He looked at her. Something in his face, something very controlled and very long practiced, shifted slightly, the way light shifts when a cloud moves somewhere you are not looking. She said, "I have a physical therapy appointment Thursday morning. I cannot miss it." He said, "I know." She said, "I cannot be apologizing every time I make a sound in the kitchen. It is apparently a significant character flaw, and I am working on it." He said, "I am aware." She looked at the window behind him. The city was going gold and gray in the evening. She had looked at that city from her bus window every morning and every night for 6 weeks, and here it was from a different angle, and it was the same city and completely different, and that felt like it meant something. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "Your sister would have been 34, she said. "I think she would have liked that I changed the spice rack. Alphabetical is a very boring system." She said it because it was true, and because it was the kind of thing that was too specific to be only comfort, and too warm to be only information, and she wanted him to have it. He was very still. Then, quietly, with the first thing she had ever seen from him that did not have anything between it and the surface, he said, "She would have loved it." Nadia picked up her coat. She did not put it on. She held it over her arm. "Then I will reorganize the breakfast shelf tomorrow," she said. "The teas are also alphabetical, and it is genuinely inefficient." She went back down the hallway toward the kitchen to collect the apron she had left on the counter. Behind her, she heard him sit down, the small sound of a person settling into a chair, not with tension, but with something closer to relief. She picked up the apron. She held it for a moment, the white cotton familiar and clean, smelling like the kitchen that had been hers for 6 weeks, and was apparently going to keep being hers. She hung it back on the hook. She went to make tea. The knee was aching slightly, a manageable ache, the kind she now had a name and a plan for. She moved around the kitchen without hiding it, without redistributing her weight into the careful performance of normal. Just walked the way she walked, and the kitchen received her without comment. Outside, the city was finishing its evening. She had not fixed anything, exactly. She had not resolved anything in the clean, closed way of things that are finished. Her apartment was still hers, with its cold winters and its 4 flights of stairs. She still had a knee that would have bad days. She still had the deeply embedded reflex of sorry that was going to take longer to unlearn than one conversation. But she had put the keycard down. She had not given it back, and the apron was on its hook. She stood at the stove and watched the kettle. She was thinking about Thursday, the appointment with Georgia, the 3 exercises that were already making a difference, the way Georgia said doing well without making it sound like a prize but like a fact. She was thinking about the way he had said stay, as though it were a simple thing, a reasonable thing, a thing that cost neither of them any performance. She was thinking about her mother, who had spent her whole life apologizing for taking up space, and her own life spent learning that particular grammar from her, and what it would mean to put that grammar down now, not all at once, but incrementally, the way you unlearn anything that was taught rather than true. The kettle boiled. She made 2 cups. She carried one down the hallway and set it on the table near where he was sitting, with his papers in the last of the evening light. She did not apologize for interrupting. She went back to the kitchen. The limp did not fully go away. Georgia had said it might not, depending on the day, the weather, the accumulated hours of standing, the cold fronts that did what they always did, to joints that had been damaged and improperly managed for too long. Nadia walked with it. She walked with it without performing its absence. She walked the way she walked, her left foot with its slight drag, her body moving through the world exactly as it was, unreduced, unapologized for. That was the real change. It was not dramatic. It did not arrive with music or with someone saying the right words at the right moment, though someone had, more than once, said something true. It arrived the way most real things arrive, quietly, in stages, in the space between one way of being and another, so gradually that she could not have said exactly when it began, only that it was happening, only that she was different on this side of it than she had been on the other. She stood at the kitchen window with her tea. The city was going dark now, the buildings lighting up in the familiar pattern of evenings, the particular color of a city at the end of the day. She looked at it. She did not say sorry. For the city. For the view. For being there, standing at the window of a kitchen that had become hers, in a way she had not predicted. She just looked. She just stood there, held up by the floor and her own 2 feet, one of which was not quite what anyone would call typical, and both of which had carried her through things that would have stopped a person less practiced at continuing. She stood there and looked at the city, and breathed. Everything else followed from that. It always does.